There was a body under my bed, and no one believed me. I was only 12 years old when it happened. I was sitting on the floor of my room, looking at my collection of marbles, when one of them, a tiger's eye, rolled out and disappeared under the bed. Without thinking twice, I reached out to find it. But instead of the smooth surface of the ball, my hand touched something cold and dead. At that moment, the only hands I had ever held belonged to my parents when I was very young. The realization that I had just touched something horrible struck me like a bolt of lightning. I immediately pulled my hand away and crawled to the opposite corner of the room. My heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed the whole world could hear it. When the panic receded a little, I gathered my courage and got down on all fours, looking under the bed. At that moment, I saw the eyes. They were bright blue, so piercing that this image is etched in my memory forever. The next thing I remember is the faces of my parents standing over me, their eyes filled with worry. My sister, Sarah, said that I suddenly screamed as if my very soul was being ripped out of me, and then I fell down and fainted. When I regained consciousness, the memories of what had caused my loss of consciousness returned with frightening clarity. I realized that there was a body under my bed. As you might have guessed, my parents took it as a childish made-up joke. They kept telling me that it was just a bad dream or my imagination was playing a cruel trick on me. But I insisted on my story. My stubbornness forced them to go and check. I remained sitting on the couch, curled up in a ball, with my ears plugged and eyes closed. I was preparing to hear the scream that I thought would surely come out of my mom's mouth when she saw what I saw. But instead, the room remained silent. Feeling the tension rising, I opened my eyes slightly to see my parents standing in front of me. Their faces did not express fear or surprise, only irritation. They scolded me for making a stupid joke and told me not to make up any more nonsense. Their tone made me doubt myself. Did I really see what I thought I saw? For the rest of the evening, I stayed away from my room as much as I could. But when it was time to go to bed, I realized that there was no point in arguing. The look in my father's eyes said it all. With trembling hands and a heart beating like a drum, I returned to my room. At first glance, everything looked normal. Nothing seemed wrong, even the smell was normal. This brought some relief, and at the same time, the exhaustion of the day's events began to take over. I quickly changed clothes, climbed into bed, and, to my surprise, fell asleep quickly. But my sleep was far from restful. I had nightmares all night long. Those terrible blue eyes haunted every face that appeared in my dreams. I was running through crowds of people reaching out to me, begging for something, but I couldn't understand their words. I woke up when it was still dark outside. The feeling of unease that hung in the air made me look under the bed again. If this was going to happen, it would be better sooner than later, I thought. I carefully opened the drawer next to my bed and felt for the flashlight. Before I turned it on, I squeezed it tightly in my palm, trying to calm myself down. Gathering my courage, I got off the bed and looked under it. What I saw made me petrified. She was still there. The same woman with the piercing blue eyes. Her body was disfigured and bloody, but it was the expression on her face that shocked me the most. It was pure horror and helplessness. I expected her to suddenly come to life, stretch out her bloody arms and pull me to her, like in those scary movies. But she didn't even move. Didn't even blink. Didn't make a single sound. I slowly crawled back into bed, never making a sound. The blanket seemed to be the only barrier between me and that nightmare under the bed. I cried until I finally fell asleep, asking myself and the universe, why me? How am I supposed to fix this? That morning I woke up with puffy eyes, the consequences of a sleepless night and endless tears. When I finally forced myself out of bed and entered the kitchen to greet my family, my mother stood with her back to me, busy preparing breakfast. She threw a short, "Good morning," without even turning around, but my father immediately turned his attention to me. His voice sounded sharp. "What the hell happened to your face?" I stopped, feeling all eyes on me. My mom turned around, looking at my red, puffy eyelids in surprise. My sister, Sarah, who was usually called sharp-tongued, didn't miss a chance to joke. "You look like a hellhole." Her comment drew a stern look from my father, but it didn't stop her from smiling with satisfaction. Without thinking, I started to explain. "It's all because of that woman under my bed." Before I could finish my sentence, my father interrupted me, his voice even colder. "Enough of this," he said so decisively that he left no room for discussion. "You will stop this ridiculous performance immediately, do you understand?" My father was a man whose word was law. As soon as he decided something, discussion stopped. He said a few more harsh words, making it clear that he would not tolerate such jokes. The atmosphere at breakfast became difficult, and I realized that it was better not to bring up the topic at home, especially in the presence of my father. However, school was a different world. I felt a little freer there, though not much. Joey, my best friend and the only person I could trust with my story, believed me right away. His eyes lit up and he started to think. "It has to be a ghost," he said, rubbing his imaginary beard theatrically. Joey was the same kid who, as early as 5 years old, had been talking about Ghostbusters and reading books about the supernatural. His passion only grew with age. But I felt her hand, I objected, remembering the cold touch. He nodded, looking thoughtfully into the distance. "Ghosts don't always look like that translucent fog from the movies, you know. They can be more physical." I didn't quite understand what he meant, but his explanation sounded much better than the idea that I was just going crazy. After all, who wants to think they're hallucinating at the age of 12? After a long discussion, with Joey doing most of the talking, we came to the conclusion that she was a lost soul, tied to this world for some reason. Why she chose me was a mystery. There was nothing in my life that could interest her. My biggest concern at the time was winning a Pokemon card game or reaching a new level in a video game. I definitely didn't look like someone who could help bring a spirit to peace or light, as it is usually described in supernatural stories. Joey offered some ideas. "Maybe we should call a priest. Or get a Ouija board." He said it with such determination, as if it were as simple as going to the store to get milk. "Are you serious?" I almost laughed. My parents wouldn't even let me go to a PG-13 movie, let alone something like this. Despite all our talks, I realized that I had neither the courage or the knowledge to solve this problem. The only thing that was clear was that I would have to meet her again. How, when, and why remained a mystery. All these thoughts, questions, and fears continued to fill my head throughout the day, not letting me rest even for a moment. When I returned from school, I was greeted by the silence of an empty house. It was a common thing, I was always the first one home. My parents were working late, and my sister Sarah was usually late for cheerleading practice. I usually followed my after-school routine, would grab a snack, sit in front of the TV for half an hour, and then sit down to do my homework. Everything had to be done before my parents came home, otherwise I would have a stern conversation with my father, who would check everything to the smallest detail. But this time it was different. I was on a mission. Homework could wait. Pulling myself together, I went to my room and stood by my bed, trying to find some courage. I needed to understand who this ghost was and what it wanted. Taking a deep breath, I slowly counted from 10 to 1, and then abruptly fell to my knees, looking under the bed. My hopes that she wouldn't be there anymore were quickly dashed. She was there. In the same contorted position, with the same look of shock and despair. But now she looked even more horrible. Her skin, which had been pale before, was now a gray shade, like that of a dead person. In some places, it sagged, as if it was about to fall off the bones. In others, it was stretched so tightly that it gave her face an emaciated, skeletal appearance. At my age, I didn't know much about death, but seeing dead birds and squirrels in the forest was enough to realize that this was the look of decomposition. And as soon as this thought hit me, I smelled it. Sickly sweet, it filled my nostrils, causing an instant wave of nausea. I jumped up and ran to the bathroom. As soon as I reached the toilet, I threw up. It seemed like my entire stomach had been thrown up inside. Breathing raggedly, I held on to the sink, trying to recover, but the smell still haunted me, and the image under the bed was etched in my mind like a horrible horror movie cliché. When my sister Sarah returned home, I had only managed to erase the outward traces of my episode, but not much else. As soon as she saw me, she immediately asked why I wasn't doing anything around the house. "You know that Dad will just smash you to pieces if he comes and sees this," she said, emphasizing how serious it was. And I knew she was right. Dad couldn't stand it when things didn't go according to plan. But even if I wanted to, I just couldn't bring myself to go into my room. It seemed that after I saw her body, this unbearable smell of death became alive, filling every corner of my room. Even when I moved away from her, it remained with me, penetrating everywhere like some invisible fog. I tried to explain to Sarah how much worse things had gotten. But when I started talking, I saw her face become filled with irritation. Her voice was clearly displeased, even though she was trying to sound sympathetic. "Very well. Then let me prove to you that it's all in your head." She stood up abruptly and moved toward my room, with the obvious intention of exposing the myth. I immediately threw myself in front of her, closing the door. I threw my arms out wide, as if hoping to be enough of an obstacle to make her stop. "Sarah, no. Please leave it closed," I pleaded, feeling anxiety clenching my chest. I couldn't let her in. The door only barely contained the horrible stench that seemed to seep in from everywhere. How could she not smell it? Even through the crack at the bottom of the door, the smell seemed to grip me in a vice-like grip. Sarah froze. I saw her stern and irritated expression change to a slightly softer one. Something like concern flashed in her eyes for a moment. She took a breath, as if about to say something, but never said a word. Instead, she simply turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my panic and fears. My father rushed into my room like a storm, barely dragging me with him. His grip was so strong that I could feel his fingers squeezing my wrist, leaving marks that would probably stay for days. I tried to say something, begged him to stop, but he wouldn't even look in my direction. His eyes were burning with anger, and his jaw was clenched tightly, like a man who no longer wants to hear any excuses. "Do you really think I'm going to put up with this nonsense?" he said, opening the door to my room with such a swing that it hit the wall. The smell I was afraid of immediately hit me in the face, but he didn't seem to notice. It even seemed to me that the smell had intensified, as if the ghost itself had sensed our visit and was reacting to it. In one motion, while still muttering words like incapable and childish pranks, my father lifted my bed. He seemed to turn it upside down with everything on it, the frame, the mattress, even my pillows flew to the side. In the anger and strength I had always associated with him, he turned the bed sideways, opening up the space underneath. I looked at the floor, frozen, even afraid to breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to faint. But there was nothing there. Not a decomposed body, not those eerie blue eyes, not even a smell, at least for him. For me, the stench was still there, as was the fear. "That's it," he shouted, turning to me. "Enough of this nonsense. You're wasting my time and filling your head with nonsense." His voice was so loud that the walls seemed to shake with me. I could not say a single word. I just stood there, scared and embarrassed, feeling both crazy and humiliated. How could he not see her? How could he not smell the odor that seemed to penetrate even my lungs? My father let go of my hand, and I fell to the floor as if I had been cut off. He threw the bed back into place as easily as he had picked it up and left the room, muttering under his breath. During the few minutes I sat on the floor, I didn't even try to get up. I could feel the tears rolling into my eyes, but I held them back. I couldn't give him that pleasure. When the room finally became quiet, I looked under the bed again. She was still there. In the same place. Her blue eyes looked at me with the same helplessness and terror. But now her face seemed to be even more exhausted, and her body was decomposing even more. My voice was trembling, but I whispered, "What do you want from me?" Although there was no answer, her eyes seemed to speak, "Save me." Terror became my constant companion. Every night I felt on the verge of some imminent evil that was slowly consuming me along with the creature under my bed. The nightmares of her escape in the forest became more and more real, so much so that I could feel the cold wind biting her skin, the scratches from the branches that were tearing through, and, worst of all, her despair. Her cries for help, quiet but filled with terror, echoed in my mind even after I woke up. In the morning, I looked as bad as I felt. My eyes were red and puffy, and my skin had lost any hint of healthy color. My sister Jill didn't make fun of me anymore, although she didn't know what to say. One day, as I sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed with fatigue, she leaned over and whispered to me, "Whatever it is, you have to do something about it. It's destroying you." I felt real compassion in her words, and it warmed me a little. But I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I was afraid of both a dead ghost and my living father. Meanwhile, my room looked more and more like a dungeon. The smell of decomposition was no longer limited to the space under the bed. It filled the room, seeping into the furniture, the wallpaper, even my thoughts. I could no longer eat or drink in that place. It seemed that its presence poisoned everything it touched. I knew I couldn't let it go on like this. But what could I do? I had no friends to turn to except Joey, but even he seemed powerless in the face of this. My parents? I didn't even want to think about them. Again and again the thought came to me, she wants me to do something. But what? What could I do for someone who was already dead? The fact that my mother was quietly helping me was the only consolation in this dark time. Her care was unobtrusive but vital. One day, when she brought me a plate of food late at night, I saw something new in her eyes, not only anxiety, but also despair. She knew that something was happening to me, and perhaps even guessed the source of my suffering, but she was too constrained by the circumstances to help me outright. When I started my online search, hoping to find some connection to the ghost girl, my room turned into a makeshift investigation center. I looked through local archives, social media, even old newspapers. Nothing. There was not a single trace of her. This increased my sense of hopelessness. She continued to rot, and I continued to lose myself. Every night the nightmares became more violent. I saw through her eyes, felt her fear, pain and helplessness. The stalker who was finally catching up with her left me with a feeling of deep horror even when I woke up. These dreams became so vivid that I would wake up with scratches on my arms and legs, as if from thorny branches that ran along her escape route. I began to be afraid to sleep, afraid of the night, afraid of what I was seeing. One night, after a particularly terrible dream, I woke up covered in tears and sweat. The smell of decay was so intense that I could hardly breathe. I could barely muster the strength to get out of bed. But this time I knew it couldn't go on. She was showing me these horrors for a purpose. I had to take a chance. I didn't know how to do it or what to look for, but I had to find a way to free her and myself. That moment was both a relief and a pain. The ghost I had lived with for so long was no longer haunting me. I was free of her, but I also felt a huge emptiness. She was a part of my life, my nightmares, my nights. And even when she was gone, I could feel her presence, her suffering, her pain, staying with me. I realized that these nightmares, although demonic in nature, were only a reflection of deeper issues. She, this ghost woman, could be an image not only of my personal pain, but also of all that I felt in my family, her own dark shadow from which there was no escape. My family, with all its imperfections and tensions, left me desperate and powerless. My parents could not understand me, and I could not tell them about it. I was alone in everything, and this ghost was the only one who somehow helped me to see the world through different eyes, even through suffering. My prayer that she would find peace was not just a wish. It was a desire to free her, even if I didn't know how to do it myself. Although she left, I realized that her story would always be with me. This experience changed me, leaving a deep mark, even after she disappeared. I could not erase this memory. It was more than just a fearful experience, it was an important lesson about compassion, pain, and the need to be ready to help, even if it seems impossible. Anxiety and uncertainty completely gripped me. I could not understand what was happening. My sister was crying, and I could not comfort her because I was gripped by the same feeling of fear. Questions swarmed through my mind: what happened to my parents? It was hard for me to imagine what could have happened that was so terrible that our parents could not come on their own. All these thoughts were racing through my mind, not giving me peace. Mr. Cash had left us with unconfirmed fears, but I felt like it wasn't just a small thing. If it was something insignificant, he wouldn't have kept us in such tension. I looked at Jill, her tears were pouring incessantly, and I could feel the anxiety overwhelming me. So I decided to do what I always do in situations like this. I tried to calm myself down, although this time it was hard to even breathe. I couldn't understand why this situation seemed so serious. Meanwhile, I realized that this was just the initial wave of experiences. Everything was changing, and I couldn't control what was happening. My thoughts were overwhelmed, and I couldn't even believe that after everything that happened with the ghost, our lives could change even more. With every minute that passed, the anxiety only grew. It wouldn't let go, like the cold sweat that covers you when you don't know what's going to happen next. And I knew that something really big and terrible had happened, and everything would change. Even though we tried to find out more, my aunt kept us in the dark. Her words sounded calm, but every look she gave us and every pause in her words made me even more anxious. I could see Jill trying to keep her composure, but her eyes could not hide her panic. "What happened to our parents?" she finally asked, trying to say it quietly, but her voice, like mine, was filled with anxiety. My aunt looked at both of us and answered briefly again. "Your mom will tell you when she is ready. Now is not the time to talk." These words, though calm, made everything worse. A scary picture began to form in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from us. My aunt was so calm, but her indifference to our concerns did not leave me indifferent. I couldn't understand why she didn't want to tell us more. We left the office and went with her, our hearts filled with uncertainty. I looked at Jill and saw her eyes filled with doubt and fear. We both realized that what we were about to learn could change our lives forever. And although we didn't know exactly what had happened, I felt that what lay ahead could be much worse than we could have imagined. It was a difficult and painful reality that hit my family, and especially me. I looked at the news, at all the details that had not yet been revealed, and felt as if the whole world had turned upside down. My thoughts and emotions were broken into 1,000 pieces that were difficult to operate with. I couldn't believe that my father, this man who was my role model and part of my life, was involved in such horrible acts. Nevertheless, although the pain was unbearable and the feeling of anxiety did not recede, I began to realize that the destruction of this dark secret had become something important to my soul. Anna, this ghost, this spirit that had been haunting me, had now found peace, and I had found my truth. It was a bitter denouement, but I was free from the demons that had plagued us. My mother, although broken, found the strength to keep us safe and protected us from a world that was full of horrific realities. It was a hard road to recovery, to understanding who we were now and how to move forward. But with each passing day, I became stronger. Perhaps Anna needed peace so that I could find mine. And although I could not erase what had happened, I could grow and learn to live with this truth, accept what had happened and move on, not forgetting, but also not letting it define my life. This dream was the culmination of my inner struggle, a release from the constant pressure and fear. When Anna appeared before me not as a ghost, but as a calm and peaceful soul, it was like the last step towards healing. Her aura was not dark, but rather light and soothing. It wasn't just a burden being lifted, but a kind of sign that she had found her peace, and now I had to find mine. I felt that from that moment on, my life would change, but it was no longer connected to the tragedy. Now it was the beginning of a new stage. I knew that even in the darkest moments there is an opportunity for recovery and peace. Although the future remained unpredictable, this dream gave me hope. Hope that even among the ruins, we can find a way to recovery, peace and love. That night, I was finally able to let go of the pain and anxiety that had been gripping me for so long. My soul found at least a little peace, and although the path was difficult, I began to believe that everything would be okay.
Cursed Tales. Trash Horror Stories. Subscribe for a scream.